Hey folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris on Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel, coming to you live from Central Pennsylvania. Yes, I am wearing a rugby shirt today. It's not a jersey though. This is from the Rugby World Cup from the William Webb Ellis collection. Check it out. Pretty nice, huh? Ooh, yeah, from Japan. Nice embroidered quality. I think I've worn it on the program once before. But anyway, a little more serious topic today, talking business with my special feature guest today. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, it's Thanksgiving here in the United States. Ooh, Thanksgiving. It's the day of the year in which we give thanks for all that we have and are grateful for what we have. And it's a result of a very long time ago in early American history when colonial settlers in New England were on the verge of starvation, and Native American tribes who were friendly brought them food and sustenance so they could survive. And we remember this day as a consequence of that. Anyway, so that's today. It's a holiday, and here I am working to bring you guys something interesting. And I do have a very interesting topic today. I hope that folks find it appealing and that we get a good audience, or at least a large audience after the fact to watch this. But my special feature guest today is from the macadamia nut industry. What's that, the macadamia nuts? Well, they're quite an interesting nut, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We're going to talk about South Africa, its role, and this is, I think, an upbeat story. It's all about good news for South Africa for a change, where South Africa leads the world in something, and something actually wonderful. All right, so with that, I'm going to welcome my guest, and this is Lizel Pretorius. Welcome, Lizel. How are you?
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much. Good and you. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, it's my pleasure. How
Good.
Well, welcome to the channel. It's a pleasure. You've been very busy, and it's very kind of you to take the time out. We've been trying to set this up for some time, and happy to have you on now. So let's talk about this just a little bit. A couple things up front. You are with the South African Macadamia Nut Growers Association, correct? You're the CEO?
Yes, I'm Lizel Pretorius. I'm the CEO of Macadamia South Africa, obviously representing our South African macadamia farmers, and obviously doing for them things that's quite important for the industry as well as our farmers.
Well, it's kind of interesting for me because when I think of farming, I mean, I don't really think of orchards and apple trees. I mean, that is farming, but to me, of course, having been a dairy farmer, I'm thinking of cattle and sheep and goats and chickens and maize and things like that. But in fact, it is a farm. It's part of the farming industry. You've got trees and nuts grow on them, and that's the product. Macadamia nuts don't come from South Africa, though. If I'm not mistaken, they come originally from Australia.
Yeah, you're totally correct. It comes from Australia, and obviously from there it went to Hawaii and back, and then South Africa started planting very low volumes in terms of hectares. But if I look at the past 17 years, we've grown more than 390% in terms of the number of hectares that we expanded. So yeah, and we continue each year with at least, if I look at last year, we expanded with additional almost 6,000 hectares.
Wow, that's something I want to mention. So even though it's relatively small in terms of hectares that are planted, that are under cultivation, I guess that's the right term, nonetheless, South Africa is the world's largest exporter of macadamia nuts. How does that happen?
We can do some things very, very, very good. And apparently we can do macadamia nut production exceptionally well. So yeah, we've definitely, if I look at the past 2 years, if I can call it, took over Australia in terms of production. And last year our crop was just over 59,000 tons. So we were the biggest producer if we look at the last 2 years specifically, and this year as well.
Well, I have no objections to you overtaking Australia. No objections whatsoever. Of course, the macadamia nut industry didn't exist. These nuts were in Australia. Animals would eat them. Some people would eat them occasionally. And then they were exported to Hawaii in the 19th century. And the commercial macadamia nut industry started in Hawaii. And for about a century, we were the world's largest producer of macadamia nuts here in the United States. But Australia overtook us about 2000, I forget it was, but not all that long ago. But they didn't hold the title for very long because South Africa has overtaken Australia. So now South Africa is the world's largest producer of macadamia nuts and exporter. It's an interesting title. And I think a lot of people eat macadamia nuts, really enjoy them. I'll be honest, I'm more a pistachio person, not really a macadamia nut. That doesn't help your industry. Sorry about that, Lizel, but
We need to spin you.
yeah, you'll have to convert me and you have to turn
Yeah.
me. But macadamia nuts are, compared to a lot of other nuts, actually quite lucrative because they're very expensive compared to many nuts. Is that not true?
Yes, Chris, they are. I almost want to say we see the macadamia nuts. If you look at the total nut basket, we're less than 2% of the total nut basket. And that makes us sort of a niche market, and a niche product. And associated with that, you're busy consuming a niche product. So we've been very thankful and lucky for exceptionally well prices compared to other nuts, other tree nuts.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned that of the nut basket. I actually looked up the figures, and yeah, it is less than 2%. It's 1.42%. It's the most recent data that I found of all the nuts produced in South Africa. So even in South Africa, even though it's massive for global scale by comparison, it's a rather small product in South Africa. And in fact, along those lines, I understand that less than 2% of the nuts are consumed domestically. So your domestic market is quite small, and you rely heavily on the export market, which I imagine kind of leaves you vulnerable to commodity price swings.
Yes, Chris, like you said, about 2% goes into our local market. And if you ask the question why, if you look at the South African currency, our rand value is very low. So farmers, by exporting, earns dollars, euro, and the Chinese currency. So we quite focused on exports. If I look at our nut and shell, we're quite focused on going to China. And our kernel markets are more centered around America as well as in Europe. So those are the markets we're currently in, but we're obviously busy with plans to look at new markets to also start moving into.
Well, actually, I think it's a good point, and it's a key distinction there for people not familiar with the industry, which would be most of us. So you've talked about two different things. You talk about kernel, and you talk about nut and shell. So the distinction there being is that, for instance, when I go to Pick and Pay and I buy a can of pistachios or macadamia nuts, and I open them up and the shell is gone. It's just the nut inside there. They may or may not have been roasted depending on the type of nut, but they're or salted or whatever. But they're there inside a container or a plastic satchel. Whereas the in nut and shell is like when I think of pistachios all the time, where they dye them red. Not you don't dye macadamia nuts red, but they're still in the shell, and then the consumer pulls the shell off and eats the nut. As I understand it, the big market for that so far is China. The Chinese prefer the nut and shell.
Yes, Chris, they definitely do. And I think if I can say one reason for that, there's many reasons, but one of that, it's quite a traditional way how they, consume the nut. They've got like a little key that they open the nut, So that still plays a huge reason why they prefer nut in shell and not kernel. But we do see in the future that, especially with your youngsters, your millennials, or Generation Z, that there might be a greater demand for the kernel, to easy consume instead of having a long process to go through.
Of course, as a consumer, it's always clever. You need to make sure when you look at the weight when you're buying something, because especially nuts, because whether it's nut and shell or kernel, there's a significant difference in the weight. So if you're buying nut and shell, it may be a bigger bag, but you're probably getting less nuts. But yeah, so you just have to be a wise consumer when it comes to that.
Definitely, yeah.
So that's your three biggest markets. I mean, when I say not you yourself, but South Africa, it's the United States, Europe, and then China at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. We are to a lesser degree, and it's really such small percentages that it's not really worth mentioning it. Do send to other countries, but it's very, very small volumes, And I think a lot of the countries, if I look specifically at India, they're not used to the macadamia nut. It's still a very untapped population that we need to move in. And we do hope in future that we start tapping into India. They are consuming nuts, definitely, but they're not familiar with the macadamia nut. So in future, we will definitely look to explore, to go to other countries such as India, maybe Germany, etc., and yeah.
Well, here's an interesting comment from the chat from Ali A. Ali A says, it's interesting that I can easier find macadamia nuts from Israel than from South Africa. And Ali is in South Africa. So is that true? I mean, you may not know the specific instance, but are macadamia nuts actually imported to South Africa from abroad?
Well, Chris, according to my information, not. If I look at our stats and our data, do import is very, very small volumes. And if it happens, it's so small and it comes from our neighboring countries, from neighboring African countries. I've not seen ever that we really import from an international market. So yeah, it's weird that he says that, he finds it easier in Israel. But what we need to keep in mind is that the demand is so high and the supply is so low. That's why you experience those problems, I'm assuming.
That could be the case. Yeah, in fact, it's interesting that he said that. But it's always the case when you want something, you're looking for it, you just can't find it. For instance, yesterday I had Jack Miller from the Cape Party on my channel, and somebody in Cape Town says, I've never heard of the Cape Party. Well, that doesn't bode well for your party, Jack. So, yeah. But speaking of domestic consumption, it's really low. I mean, 2%. Look, Australia, I think the figure is 30% of macadamia nuts that are produced in Australia actually consumed. That's among the highest level. So, I mean, basically, most people who produce macadamia nuts are exporting to markets around the world where they don't grow them. But Australia, the domestic consumption is a bit higher. And of course, that should help them with the vagaries of currency fluctuations and market conditions, commodity prices. But I would imagine that the South African macadamia nut is very vulnerable to those price swings.
Yes, Chris. Well, currently we've been very lucky that we didn't experience, severe price swings. Things are positive, even during the COVID period. But the main thing is that in our case, the growers obviously don't market their product. It's the processors or handlers, how we call it, and they look at the markets where they want to go to. And because of this demand that's so high, there wasn't even a need yet to look at our local market, and start introducing the nut in the local market. Because once again, the currency, South African currency, is so low at this stage.
Well, that's great for me when I can travel, but because of the 72-hour requirement for a negative COVID test, I can't get to South Africa within 72 hours, so I can't travel. But when I can travel again, hopefully soon, I'll take advantage of the low currency.
Definitely come. So that we can swing you and convert you into a macadamia nut eater. So please do, Chris.
Well, I'm a massive hazelnut fan, not from eating the hazelnuts themselves, but from eating Nutella. So.
Oh, obvious. Me too.
So in the chat, Lee Roberts says, where in South Africa do you grow the nuts? Well, the nuts are grown all over the country, but the three major provinces are Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and KZN. And I believe that's because the environment is better suited. Is that accurate?
You're 100% correct, Chris, that it's mostly at this stage, if we look at it's Mpumalanga, Limpopo, KZN, we've got North Coast, South Coast. And then a very small percentage that we're seeing is happening in the Cape, in the Eastern and Southern Cape as well. They've started small volumes of planting. So yes, that's mainly where we at this stage are producing macadamia nuts.
Now, I think it's a fair statement, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this one, Lizel, but it's a fair statement to say that this is really a relatively new industry. It's not something that South Africans were very much involved in before the new dispensation. So after 1994, or the turn of the century, roughly that time frame, is when this market developed in South Africa, and it's almost like a new industry. Is that accurate?
If I compare it to other commodities, like the fruit, the citrus, etc., then obviously we definitely are very relatively new farming operations, if I can call it, or going into a new crop, and expanding it. So yes, we definitely new, and that's why there's still a lot that we need to do in terms of going forward, in terms of what we need to do in terms of research, development, etc.
Well, I find it very interesting because at a time when there's a lot of economic challenges in South Africa, it sounds like this industry has made a lot of progress in a short period of time. Now, the industry is not without challenges, but there are also advantages. And this is, again, while I need you to correct me if I get it wrong, but as I understand it, the macadamia nut industry, in order to start it cost about 100,000 rand per hectare in order to plant a grove. And so, but you can make as much as 375,000 rand off a hectare once trees mature and start producing. Now, that's the upside, I imagine. I'm sure it's lower than that in many cases. But you don't normally, although this year I think there was a problem, but you don't normally have trouble with pest and disease for the most part. Like a lot of crops are very vulnerable, and so it seems like a product that lends itself to successful production.
Yes, maybe we do. To a certain extent, we definitely have problems with pest and disease. If I look at the reason, we might talk about our crop for this year. A lot of impacts that we experienced was related to pest and disease. If I look only at the stink bug, the estimated losses was over 181 million. That was experienced due to this pest. So we do have pest and disease, and that's why from SAMEC or Macadamia South Africa, we spend 50% of our budget on research because it's so important to look at, natural way to work with nature and to timelessly prevent, pests going into the orchard and influencing the quality of the crop as well as the volumes.
No, it's the stink bug. We have those too. Those are nasty little buggers. No pun intended, nasty little buggers. But is that so? 181 million rand in nut loss to the stink bug. Wow, that's. Now, are they concentrated in a particular region, or do you find it all over the country?
We mostly find it in one province where we have a huge problem, if I can say it in that extent, to a bigger degree, and then to a lesser degree in some of the other regions. So. But there's a host of, of pests that we look after. But this one specifically, we quantify in terms of monetary value, and we realized, we need to do something in future. So we've got quite a few research projects going on with universities to understand the stink bug and how we can naturally, work towards making sure that we prevent them, and it's not all about spraying. We work with Mother Nature. So, yeah.
Now, a lot of people always get wrapped around the axle from a political standpoint about diversity, and they consider diversity one of these, one of those, one of these. We got a man, we got a woman, we got a black, we got a white, we got a brown, got a Jew, got a Muslim. That's not diversity. That's just one of these and one of those. True diversity is diversity of thought and diversity of experience. But I can't help but notice when I look at the website for the Growers Association that it looks like almost everybody with the organization is a woman. Are men allowed to play in the macadamia nut industry? I just want to know, because if I can't be part of the team, I need to know up front.
Yes, Chris. No, yes, we mostly females that's running the commodity organization or responsible for strategic objectives that's set by our board. I can maybe only compliment, the board that was open enough to understand, that the best person needs to be hired, not looking at physically you're female, and that they're open-minded. So I can only applaud them for doing that, and with the rest of our lots of females working there and doing a great job on this side.
Well, I mean, that's fantastic. I can agree with that 100%. You hire the best person for the job. But if all the best people are women, I'm getting a little bit nervous here because I might not be able to get a job.
No, at least we've got two males, so there's some balance happening.
Okay, well then you won't need my help. I was going to say if you needed a token male, I'll sign up. But you already have. No, but seriously, it is. I think it's interesting because I mean, when we say traditional, I mean the world over. Traditionally, you look at farmers, and even though women are deeply involved in farming, especially in Africa, especially in East Africa, lots of women in farming. But when we think of farmers, especially in a commercial sense, you think of male. And oftentimes a white male. So it's interesting when I went to your website to see all these women involved in the Growers Association and making decisions, strategic decisions about which direction the industry is going. And I like what you said, that the board picked the best people. So that's pretty awesome. Now, the people that are with your association, are they? I assume that they're coming from the macadamia nut industry, or maybe they even have farms themselves, or is that the norm, or do you just have people that are just smart people you hire off the street to come in and bring expertise in?
Yeah, if we look at from SAMEC's side, our members are mostly, obviously, we're a commodity organization, so we've got just over 600 farmers, and then we've got an additional 200 members that consist of people in the value chain, like your nurseries, your processors, your handlers, and associate members like banks that will obviously be interested in what's happening. So yes, that's mainly how they consist. But the key aspect, if we look at our board, obviously the SAMEC board is directors. We've got 6 directors, which is farmers themselves. It's very crucial that farmers are, strategically overseeing what's happening. And we also got currently one external director that's also there to make sure that, people are there for the greater good of the industry and not for their own benefit. So that's currently how our structure operates. Yes.
Well, if you're in the Northern Cape, for instance, and you want to have a successful agricultural venture, you're probably going to have sheep, and you're probably gonna need 10,000 hectares at a minimum just so you can feed your family. But with macadamia nuts, given the high value of them and the export market, if I wanted to walk into the macadamia nut industry, or say a friend of mine who's Kosa, who wants to become a macadamia nut grower, we get some land. What's a reasonable amount of land we need to just be profitable, survive, and make a living, not to become wealthy or something like that? Would we need 100 hectares or 50 hectares? What size would it take?
If I look at our small-scale farmers, we've got just over 200 small-scale farmers, and their farms isn't that big, Some of them only planted like 4 to 5 hectares. Some of them planted 10 hectares. So it's a difficult question to answer, because obviously the end result is how good is each hectare. Is the quality exceptionally well? You're getting the right prices, there's no problem. So it's a difficult answer to say what would be the minimum, because it's going to depend on your current hectares, how profitable they are. And if they're not, then you're going to need to expand just to try and make some money. But if I look at our small-scale farmers, we've got a lot of them that's got less than 10 hectares that's very self-sustainable, and able to not only sell within their community, but take it to processors, and the processor sells to them.
Well, yeah, I guess that is kind of a hard question to answer, but I mean, but it sounds like you can be a small scale grower and survive off of this industry without a lot of land. Does that seem reasonably accurate?
Yes, at the end of the day, definitely you want to be bigger, seeing that you've got more hectares than 10. But I'm just saying that a lot of them are bypassing with that and still, living a decent life. But obviously, I would agree with you that you need much more hectares than that.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Nothing to do with the macadamia nut industry and nothing to do with anything else, but I need some help here. Listen, the problem here is ik praat nie Afrikaans nie. And while I do understand it and I can listen to it and read it and understand Afrikaans, my pronunciation can be very poor at times. And we have an Afrikaner who's living here in Pennsylvania, whose nickname is in the chat. And people are always giving me a go when I pronounce her name. So I'm going to ask you, how would you pronounce this name?
Pecky.
Pecky,
yeah.
All right, there we go. See, that's completely different than the other person who speaks Afrikaans told me. There you go. They're always pulling my leg.
No, if you're saying picky, you are saying it perfectly.
Oh, there you go. See, they keep pulling my leg. They're like, it's pucky, it's pakey, it's come on, man. You're just having fun with me. It's like the people like, I can't hear your show. And then I go on 5 different devices and play the show back and I hear it perfectly fine. Turn your volume up.
That's the thing, definitely.
Definitely the case. But she just asked a question. Let me ask the question she had. I was going to get to this in a little bit, but let me get to it now. So one of the challenges I've read about the industry is that one of the things that helps constrain the domestic consumption, at least according to some analysts, is that there is theft of lower quality nuts. I would presume ones that are either leftovers or not taken to market by the growers because you want the best quality to get the highest value, and that there's theft of nuts. So she asked a question. She said, can you ask her to tell us what security measures the macadamia nut farmers now have to take? The product value is now so high that they have much higher theft and armed robberies. Do you actually have armed robberies? I was unaware of that. That's pretty frightening. And when I say armed robberies, is that when the trucks drive away to go to take stuff to market and people are being robbed, or what's happening?
Yes. Theft is definitely a big problem. It's a big problem in our country overall. But if we look at the macadamia industry, and like you said, you're sitting with a very, very high value crop. So it is a huge problem, and from farmers' side, they need to invest heavily on in terms of putting extra security guards, fencing, cameras on their farms to try and mitigate this risk. But what we've seen with our investigations is very difficult, because often the whole process is like a supply chain. It starts from the farm worker, going to the bakkie or the truck driver, going to the person who's going to be the agent, selling it eventually, whether it's exported or sold on the local market. And like you said, yes, there's quite severe cases where they know the nuts were harvested and overnight there will be armed robbers, but luckily that's the exceptional case, if I can call it like that. But there's definitely huge problems that we from Macadamia South Africa try to work with the police services to escalate, this big problem that we've got, and that it will continue to increase, obviously, as prices go on. And if you look at the South Africa in a whole, there's a lot of poverty. A lot of people don't have jobs, so there's a holistic thing that needs to be resolved in order to resolve thefts on farms. But it definitely costs the farmers a lot of money. And the other problem as well is you sit now with a product that enters the market that was processed very unhygienically. If you think how it's done at a processing plant, and me sitting here and trying to open the nuts with my dirty hands, so there's a health risk to our consumers that ends up eating that. So it's something from Macadamia South Africa side we try to manage and mitigate by working with government, but it's not close to a point where it's going to be resolved in the next month or two.
Well, Bongani Nguenia has asked me, what if she's also pulling your leg about the pronunciation? He's being a little cheeky. I got a couple people in the chat being cheeky. But all I got to say, Bongani Nguenia, is that it's funny how I can pronounce your name correctly, yet I can't get an Afrikaner's name correctly, So what does that say? and then Janota Rose is being cheeky too. He wanted me to ask you if you're using Tresemme. Don't answer that question, Lizel. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so I haven't been to Clicks in a while, but anyway, just saying. Anyway, but so folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here on Thanksgiving Day in the United States, a national holiday, one in which it's kind of a subdued holiday this year for a number of reasons, but nonetheless, it is Thanksgiving, and you'll notice the wallpaper behind us is something a little bit different for Thanksgiving. My special feature guest today is Lizel Pretorius, who is the CEO of the Macadamia Growers Association, SAMAC, in South Africa, SAMAC, and we're talking about the macadamia nut industry. Ladies and gentlemen, for once, we're talking about something in South Africa that it leads the world in, that's a good news story. Yes, South Africa has more HIV positive people than any country in the world. That's sad news. South Africa has more COVID-19 confirmed cases than any country in all of Africa. That's sad news. But let's talk about, and also lead the world in platinum production. That's kind of good, though. But this is really good. Macadamia nuts, a high-value product, which doesn't take a lot of space to do it. It sounds like quite a unusual group of people who are involved in the industry, at least working with the association. So let's shift a little bit, and I'll ask Lizel about that. What about the growers? You talked about 600 growers, or farmers, if whichever term we want to use there. About 200 of them are small scale. I'm going to guess that most of those are Black South African growers, the small scale ones who are not traditional. You're larger than the tobacco industry in South Africa. If you have 600 growers, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. Chris, we're quite lucky, and I want to say thankful, even with our small-scale farmers, our Black farmers, we're quite thankful that they're venturing into this space because of the opportunity in terms of money value and the money value that goes back into their, immediate economy. So we've got a lot of farmers, and we do a lot of aspects to assist our small-scale farmers as well to make sure they become commercial. So we've got a lot of programs that we run to ensure we enhance skills. We provide on certain conditions financial assistance. So we've got a big drive to make sure that our small Black-scale farmers become commercial, and we are seen as a very inclusive industry. That's our ultimate dream.
No, it's very interesting, and it's also bears truth to a statement I've made in a few other industries. It's interesting that farmers themselves in the actual industry tend to be the ones that provide, not to get into politics, but just to state facts here, tend to be the ones who provide much more in the form of extension service assistance, helping people with grants, and also know-how and knowledge to helping I don't want to say non-traditional, that's not the right term, but new aspiring farmers. How's that? New aspiring farmers, that's probably a better term, which are overwhelmingly black is what we're talking about. So new aspiring farmers seem to get a lot more help from people already in the farming industry who are their competitors than they do from the government. And that's got to be frustrating for new aspiring farmers and for the industry too. Not just your industry, but the tobacco industry, the maize industry, dairy, all that stuff. It is quite, I think, an interesting phenomenon that the government doesn't really help out that much when the government's stated goal is to get more new and aspiring farmers into the industry. So what I did want to say is with the crop, the theft. Now, I actually before I get to that, I guess we have a ringer here. Okay, so let's. Okay, so whether it's Peaky, Pikey, Pucky, whatever it is there, she's a ringer. It turns out she's a ringer because I just saw her comment there, and it's not a surprise why she asked such a good, cogent question on this. Turns out that while she's in Pennsylvania, her family lives in Mpumalanga, and they're macadamia nut farmers. And she says right after harvesting to extra security for the transport and trucks. So, okay, so we've got a ringer here, folks. We got an insider from the macadamia nut industry who's a regular viewer of Chris Wyatt Africa, and we didn't even know.
Yeah.
So there you go. Well, let me ask you this very quickly. How did you get into macadamia nuts? I mean, look, I didn't roll out of bed or rock up, somewhere and go, I want to grow macadamia nuts. I mean, I fell into the dairy industry because I didn't have a choice. I was a teenager, and that was my task.
Yeah, I fell into the industry about 14 years ago. I was also working in the fruit and veg and livestock and game industry. So that obviously gave me the exposure about, the farming community and what it means, market access. So when they established in 2018 Macadamia South Africa, I assumed they obviously were looking for somebody with previous experience on, establishing a new organization, but definitely having knowledge about farms. It's critical that you understand farmers and what you need to do and provide to them. So that's just in a short nutshell how I ended up in this very thankful industry, to be honest, where I'm currently.
So obviously you must have some affinity for farming, otherwise you wouldn't be sticking with us.
Yes, definitely. I love the farming and nature. It's just awesome, to be honest. It's better than city life.
Well, I can't disagree with that. not in the least. City may be a nice place to visit on occasion, but I'm not a fan of living there. I live in a peri-urban environment myself. I walk out of my house and within 5 minutes I'm in the woods, just, right. Actually less than that if I want to go down to the creek, but it just gets muddy there. So I go the other direction towards the mountain. But no, I absolutely understand that. That's definitely a different approach to life in the countryside. But the macadamia nuts, it's interesting that you got into that business. Now, I didn't realize this, but you said the Growers Association was just founded in 2018. Is that correct?
Yes. It was actually, they call it SAMEG, a macadamia organization previously. But it was under an umbrella organization, which were also looking after other commodities. And then I think in 2017, farmers felt the need because the crop was growing so much that they needed a dedicated team and a dedicated organization to look at the future of macadamia. So we were registered as a non-profit organization in November 2018. So officially, even myself, the organization still is actually in the non-profit organization sense still relatively new, even though there was in the past a voluntary organization that did amazing work as well. But being more centered only on one commodity makes it just better to look at the future of macadamia farmers.
Now, people are guessing in the chat. Hank is asking, Piki, is your family maybe Marais? If so, I know Lizette. The thing about South Africa, it's like Botswana. It's a small town country. It's if you know somebody, because the different ethnicities and the different groupings of people in South Africa, if you know one person, odds are you probably know someone else. It's really easy. Now, that's obviously easier in Botswana, but there's only 2 million people. But in South Africa, that really is the case. Oh, do you know so? Yeah, I know so-and-so. And next thing you know, you're connected. 6 degrees of separation become 2 degrees. It's quite fascinating. So, yeah, in fact, there may be some people that know each other here. So, so she says extra security measures had to be taken since COVID nonsense at the farm. More attempts of theft on the farm. Yeah, I can imagine that. People are hungry. A lot of not to get too far from this, but a lot of people talk about the reason there's a lot of theft is because of poverty. In a general sense, I disagree with that. Having grown up in poverty, never stolen from anybody, and gone without food, most people that I know that are poor are honorable, and they're not trying to steal from other people. It's only desperation that pushes people. And we've seen in COVID-19 with the lockdown, we've seen desperation, particularly in the Eastern Cape. I mean, reports of kids eating grass. It's horrific. So one could not excuse, but certainly understand that theft might be up during the COVID-19. And is that the case? Have you seen larger theft taking place during the lockdown than previously?
Chris, I want to say not really, maybe to a certain small percentage degree, but like you said, there's various reasons for stealing. A lot of people lost their jobs. I think we're one of the countries with the highest percentage of unemployed people. And obviously you need to feed, but another definite reason is the lucrative prices. I mean, it's a get-rich scheme. If I look at where we've investigated theft, we see syndicates working together. And those syndicates, if you look at the houses, the cars, whatever, you can see they are living exclusively rich lives, So I agree with you that not everything should be centered around poverty and being unemployed, but there's also people that's just crooks, They are just in there for the money in their own pocket and not thinking about the ripple effect, because what we need to keep in mind is if somebody steals on a farm, it means that farmer is losing the income that can go back to the community. He would have possibly hired another person in the community. There's tax evasion, VAT evasion that goes back into government's pocket that assists people. So it's quite a ripple effect that goes back into it, that you're actually stealing from somebody in the community that could have had a job or could have been assisted by government via the VAT that's paid, etc. So, it's sad, but that's the reality.
No, it's a good point. People often overlook and they dismiss. That's why I really am disturbed, because I hear this particularly in Africa, because I spend so much time in Africa. Well, you have to understand the reason there's crime is because of poverty. No. That's not why there's crime. Unless people are desperate, they're not generally criminals. But there are always criminals who take advantage of people, whether they have money or not. And the ripple effect of that, as you say, when you steal the nuts from a producer who sells them on a proper market and exports them, there is revenue that comes in. They pay taxes on that. They hire people who work, who pay income taxes and buy things and pay value-added tax. And that money gets into the state's coffers so it can provide services, fix roads and highways and bridges, and provide unemployment insurance and things like that. And when you steal that, like say dodgy cigarettes under lockdown during a tobacco ban, and you sell dodgy cigarettes of unknown origin, who knows if they've got mercury or asbestos in them, and people are still smoking them and putting their health at risk. They're already at risk smoking, but they're really at risk when they're smoking dodgy cigarettes. But the same sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely right. There is a knock-on effect that criminals either don't care about, and others who try to excuse away the crime don't appreciate, because they're either not particularly well informed, or they just, I don't know, maybe they're covering up. But it is frustrating. So when it comes to, there was a question here from Elizabeth. She said, macadamia, what did she say? Sorry, what's the export percentage versus local sales? We've already covered that. It's 2% of the crop is sold in South Africa, and 98% is exported, which makes the market very vulnerable to commodity swings. So let's ask this question. I think this is a good one here too. So what's the growing season, or is there a growing season? Can you grow year round in certain parts of the country, or is it seasonal?
It's seasonal in South Africa. Obviously, we start harvesting from March to about, I want to say, July, August. It depends, obviously, the cultivar tree that you've got in the ground. So that's mainly our harvesting period, and we see our flowering period taking place now, or starting to take place. So that's basically our cycle, and it's very important for us as well to monitor the cycle, because it reflects back to what we do in terms of integrated pest management. How do we deal with those things? How do we prepare our orchards to be ready for a better crop next year? That's basically our seasonal.
So really March to July is when you're harvesting the macadamia nuts for the most part.
Yeah, I would say the most, yes.
Okay. No, I was curious because I mean, there's parts of the country that are subtropical, like KZN down on the coast. I don't know if you grow them there, and maybe you could grow them year round, but some plants just regardless of the season or regardless of the weather, if it's consistent, they'll only bear fruit at certain times. So now, do you rely on honeybees to pollinate, or do bees pollinate? Is that important for the industry?
Definitely, it's very important for us, and that's why if we look at last year. Due to the COVID, it was a bit difficult this year, but last year we ran quite a few bee forums, meetings with farmers where our experts in the bee industry came out, educate farmers about the bees, when do you need them, the benefit of cross-pollination. So definitely, I think bees as a pollinator is a crucial aspect in macadamia. So we much focus on it, and a lot of our communication that goes out to our farmers is related to how do we work with bees and the benefits of doing so. So, yeah.
Well, here in the States, of course, and in Europe, the European honeybee does the bulk of the work for us when it comes to that sort of thing. It was imported from Europe way back when, centuries ago, and they've transformed the environment here in the United States, making it possible to have orchards and nut groves all over the country. So in California, of course, we have this monoculture where you see thousands and thousands of acres of just almond trees. And some analysts attribute that to be one of the reasons for colony collapse disorder. We've had big problems with colony collapse disorder with bees here in the U.S. and in Europe. Is it a problem in South Africa? Do you have these problems with losing bees, or is that something that you've been able to avoid?
I think if I look at South Africa, a key aspect for us is that we've got like a bee organization, which we work very close with. The main thing is to make sure that when farmers spray pesticide, to make sure, when do they spray, when is the bees active, when is the bees removed. And that's why on a research level, we look at biological control as well to stop the pesticide. So yes, we do have the occasional odd concern about spraying taking place in the home to bees. But I think macadamia farmers in general is responsible, and trying to do it with Mother Nature.
Well, listen, I have to say that if nothing else, this discussion so far this morning has been very profitable for me from the standpoint that she just disclosed a secret here. So Peaky, Pikey, Pucky, she just said that, all right, I'll let you in on a little secret. My name is Jessica. So now I'll just say Jessica and I'll be off the hook. But it's okay. Don't worry about it, Jessica, because on this channel, we rename our viewers all the time. For instance, if you happen to know Deborah Olivier, who comes on the channel, we actually call her Deborah Labaskakny. We just do that. So that's just the way we do things.
South African surname.
Well, yeah. Well, she is South African, so it's a story to it. One day, people were asking about surnames, and anyway, so I renamed her Deborah Labaskakny, and so she gets a kick out of whenever she comes on. But all right, so listen, Lizel, this is the part I wanted to get to. This is okay. I never grew up on an orchard. Orchards were nearby when I lived on a farm. We had a dairy farm, so and we had maize and garden crops and things like that. But anyway, so I can imagine growing up on a macadamia nut orchard. I can, and this is what I'm thinking. So for those who don't know how they harvest them, you ought to see these automated machines that go out. They go out, and they look like forklifts, and they go to the tree, and they grab it by the trunk, and they shake the tree like this, and all the nuts come falling out. And if I was a child growing up on a macadamia nut orchard, I would be thinking when that happened, I'd be out there underneath trying to dodge all the nuts dropping on my head. So that is, in fact, how they harvest the nuts, correct?
Yes, it is. It is definitely.
It's like watching one of those 1970s or 1930s movies where they put the belt on somebody, like that's going to cause you to lose extra pounds off your waist. It reminds me of that, except that when people do that in those films, nothing falls off, thankfully, but the nuts do fall out of the tree.
That's it. That's the way they do it, definitely.
So is there an optimal point? I mean, how does a grower know when the right, I mean, because, I can look, okay, nuts are falling off the tree. I better get out and do this now and shake them down. Or do you do it when they're still green? And so how do you know? I mean, do you just guess, or you just know because you're good at it?
I think most of the farmers know when exactly to take, when is the nut, ready to be harvested. Not all the nuts obviously fall. You need to spray them with to make sure that they are ready. But there's various factors that the farmers look after before they decide to harvest. Because if you harvest too soon, then obviously you're going to sit with nuts that's not ready. And that also is dependable on what type of cultivar, what type of tree do you have, So there's a variable things that they're looking at in terms of when to harvest. But obviously they've got the expertise and know which orchard of them, which cultivar is ready for harvesting.
Okay. Well, I was serious about that. I love watching those videos of those trees being shaken. It's entertaining. It's better than most of the offerings that Mnet has. So if you're watching TV.
I agree with you there. DSTV as well.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, don't get me started Netflix. They've increased my prices 6 times in 3 years for the same service, and they are not improving the quality of it. And so I think it's just to pay for Barack Obama's salary. That's why they keep raising it on me. Because he's with Netflix now. So
yeah, no.
You made me lose my point there. You made me laugh so hard I forgot what my next question was.
You're now upset about Netflix, yeah.
No. It was not about Netflix. It was about macadamia. So, that's what it was. I remember now. Okay. So and this is going to be a kind of a clandestine, subtle, pro-America, anti-China. Even though I don't beat up on China, but that's okay. So this is a serious question. The macadamia nut industry, does it take advantage or full advantage of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act to ship your products to the U.S. duty-free? Are you able to get your products in here duty-free?
Yes, we are. We are currently under the trade agreement that we've got, so we're very thankful. We obviously, from our side, with your elections, monitored very closely to see what happened, because that could influence, that lucrative trade agreement. So we definitely...
The last part of what you said was cut off. There was a break. You said that definitely could do something?
No, we definitely making use of the trade agreement, the benefits that we derive out of it. And we're thankful, obviously to US for that.
Well, just a word of caution, as I offer advice to the business world, is look at the potential of losing that advantage, because with the expropriation without compensation bill that's before Parliament, if that fact that becomes law, South Africa invalidates its participation to GOA because it no longer respects property rights. So there's a real possibility that depending on whoever the president is or the Congress would take action, but the president would have to sign it. It'd be a very, very real possibility that South Africa could lose that advantage sometime in the next couple of years, which would be unfortunate for the $20 billion of trade between the two countries. So hopefully it won't come to that. But anyway, just a heads up, just so you're making plans and you're aware of it. Now,
we are, Chris, from our side, definitely working with government, and we have several engagements already about the GOA agreement, so that we not catch overnight, like you said, So we've got our eyes open, and let's hope for the best.
Well, that's good news. But the really good news, though, is that even if you no longer get the tariff advantage, our tariffs aren't particularly high. Now, I can't say the same thing about China. As I recall, I looked at they were charging 19% tariff for macadamia nuts coming into China. That has been lowered to 12% recently, if that's still a correct figure. But 12% tariff for nuts, what's that about other than crowding out foreign competition?
Yeah, like you said, Chris, until about 2018, it was 19%, and then it was in 2018 reduced to 12%. That's quite one of our biggest drive representing growers or producers, is to make sure that we start reducing that import levy of 12. If you compare it with Australia, I think they are duty free at this stage. So we've been working very closely with our government departments. We've got our local BRICS council as well, to see how and what can we do to lower that. But these type of things are quite difficult, because obviously when you want, like, let's say, reduce the macadamia tariff, China is going to say, okay, reduce the textile industry, and then that's got an impact on our textile industry. So those negotiations are very, very technical, very difficult. But from our side, and what we've seen, is it usually takes 5 to 10 years before we are able to resolve or at least reduce. So we're actively trying from our side. Before COVID started, the Chinese government, we invited them over to us to start that engagement with our government. But obviously, unfortunately, due to COVID-19, they couldn't visit us. So there's a lot behind the scenes that we're busy on working, and hoping that we reduce that tariff somewhere in the near future.
Well, I would imagine that would be quite a boon for the industry if you could get rid of it altogether. That would make the product much, because it's already expensive. It's a dear product anyway, costly for people. And so I don't know if it's the right term, but it's not really a luxury or delicacy, but it kind of falls into that category for a lot of consumers. And with 12% tariff on top of that, that might push it out of the range of some consumers. So if you could get rid of that tariff, it's a good chance you could grow your market in China, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. I still think if you think about how many nuts we export to China, despite that this high level of import tariff, it tells you the demand is high for South Africa, high quality, good tasting nut. And I believe that's one of the driving forces in the future. If I look at the global figures, we're currently estimating in the next 10 years by 2030 that the total global production will be almost 700,000 tons. So it tells you that, one thing that we definitely going to bank on is our high quality, good taste. And China, by keep on importing, it obviously tells you, we're ticking off those boxes.
Absolutely. Larsalis made a comment here unrelated to what we're talking about. He's talking about tariffs and he's talking about chicken industry. Larsalis, tune in for the latest stream. If you're talking about the dispute between Barack Obama and South Africa when it came to the chicken industry, I'll set you straight on that. A lot of myths, a lot of fairy tales coming out of Pretoria about that. Actually, it was protectionism. 60, 75% tariffs are not reasonable in any industry, regardless of what's going on. And Americans were not dumping chicken in South Africa. We found a market for chicken parts that Americans don't eat. By and large, we don't eat feet here, and we don't eat gizzards. Some people do, but very few. So we found a market for what was otherwise just being wasted, and we found a place to ship it. Our producers are much more efficient and far larger scale, and that's unfortunate for South Africa's poultry producers, but it's not my fault that they're inefficient. Anyway, I guess I did talk about it now instead of later. But anyway, there you go. Sorry about that, Lizel, but I couldn't help myself there. It's I'm a free market trader, but I do appreciate the need to protect some industries, particularly nascent industries, when you're trying to develop one. So I actually don't have difficulty with some tariffs at some times in some places. But in China's case, they're just being unfair, in my view. That's we give duty-free access to countries in Africa for meeting governance standards, and it doesn't really cost us much, but it's a tremendous boon for African producers because entering our market, which is the largest consumer market on the planet, the most valuable consumer market on the planet, you can sell things like macadamia nuts at a premium, and there's a market for it here. The fact that you don't have to pay tariffs makes it all that much more competitive. And we actually charge Europeans tariffs for their products coming in here, whereas we give South Africans, Namibians, and Botswana duty-free access. And it doesn't cost us a lot in terms of dollars, but it certainly helps out Africans develop their economy. And so I think it's a good idea. Whereas China is not trying to help others develop their economy. They're trying to protect their economy. And they're well past the stage of being a low-income country. They're a middle-income country and the world's second largest economy. So anyway, not to beat up on China, just having a little fun there with that. But so... We've talked about the growing season. We've talked about the organization. Let's talk a little bit. Daniel Prinsloo just subscribed. There either must be 27 Daniel Prinsloo subscribed to my channel, or that person keeps getting unsubscribed by YouTube because I keep seeing Daniel Prinsloo subscribe like once a week. Welcome, Daniel, if you're new, Daniel. Of course, I know it's a pretty common surname, but whenever I think of Prinsloo, I always think of Sandra Prinsloo, and I think of The Gods Must Be Crazy. That's when I think of Prinsloo. That's my first thought. She was an awesome actress. What a great movie. That was so funny. I was still laughing at that movie. And the Coke bottle. What's this? So let me ask you about the association specifically. So you mentioned that you spent about half your budget on research, which is interesting. And someone asked about what pest earlier, or what impact pests. We've already talked about that previously. The impact of pests does have a big impact in the industry, particularly this year. Originally, the season I think was projected beforehand at 66,000 tons was the expectation. Then it was downgraded to 53,000 in March, I think, and then later I think the estimate was 49,000 tons. What did the crop come in at? Do you have a figure on that, or any estimates thus far? Or?
Yes. Our latest survey shows that we're estimating about just over 46,000 tons. So like you said, Chris, we were maybe over-optimistic in the early year of 2020, and we were looking at figures like 62,000 tons, but currently our latest figures shows just over 46,000 tons. But a host of aspects played a role why our tonnage is so low.
Wow, Daniel Prinsloo just gave a 1,000 Rand super chat. Bye donkey, ek is praatlos. Wow. Thank you so much for that super chat. Obviously an endorsement of the guest and the content. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. That's awesome of you. Thank you. Buy a donkey for that. And it's what we call a stripper chat. There's no chat there. It's just like a donation, straight up donation. Oh, I'm humbled. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to my guest for drawing people who are able to super chat in that fashion. It's awesome. So Daniel says it's the same Daniel. So you keep getting unsubscribed. Not to go off on this, but YouTube does this to subscribers all the time. They have a legitimate right to take people who have fake accounts off, and they do that. They scrub accounts, but they also keep taking off legitimate subscribers and even paying members of my channel. People pay for membership, and they've been unsubscribed. They can still watch a channel, but they're not subscribed anymore. It's kind of crazy. But anyway, Jessica is laughing because she said I'm protlos, that I'm speechless. So did I get that right? Did I get it right? Did I say it? Or is it close anyway?
You said it perfect.
Okay.
Speak.
Okay.
Proklu.
Yeah, because in like Daniel Prinsloo, I should have said, because it's the same LLS, and in German it's Sprachlos, so it wasn't too hard for me to figure it out. So so I tell people, I said, if you speak German and you speak English fluently, you can learn Afrikaans. You may not be able to pronounce it, but you can learn it because so the word in German for water is Wasser, in English it's water, and in Afrikaans it's water. Well, that's a tough one.
I've seen with myself as well that I can sort of understand the message so yeah, it is very close.
One of my favorite sevens players is Justin Geduld, and people like, what's that mean? I said, it's easy. In German, it's Geduld. It means patience. Which is in Afrikaans same, except it's Geduld in German. It's Geduld in Afrikaans. It's a little bit different pronunciation, but anyway. So I digress from the macadamia nut industry. Let's get back to that. What I was getting to is we got into the pest. Let's get back away from the pest, but and we talked about the production this year. But so research is a big part of what the association is doing. But also, I would imagine and hope that you're doing marketing. Are you doing domestic marketing and/or international marketing? And I suspect if you are, your focus is probably more on international.
Currently, what we've done is we formed a World Macadamia Organization with other producing countries like Australia, Kenya, Brazil, Guatemala. So we're currently busy to formally establish the World Macadamia Organization. And one of our main aims of this organization is to start with late 2021 with non-origin marketing in countries where there's great opportunity for consumption. So we aren't at this stage. If we talk about marketing, remember, growers send to different processors, and those processors market that product, their product. But from a commodity organization side, we have formed the World Macadamia Organization, and we hope by, like I said, end of September next year to start with non-origin marketing, through consumer awareness campaigns, through educating them about the health benefits, etc.
Well, that's helpful to understand that. So the association sounds like it's, even though it's just 2 years old, is doing quite a bit for macadamia growers in South Africa. That's good to hear. Now, we were talking earlier, I asked a question about, if I wanted to start an orchard in South Africa. But it's not simple as getting the land and, with maize, I know what to do. I need to go out and plow, make sure it's well watered, make sure it has access to water. We have good rainfall, use some pesticides at the right time, watch it grow, come out and get the harvester and harvest it. But with these trees, it's not like that. It's like an orchard. You got to plant them. It takes time, and there's different methods to do it. You can do grafting, which will make it a little bit faster, as I understand it. But it usually takes, 4 to 5 years after planting before you can actually get something out of the tree. So you're going to have up to 5 years of unproductive use of that acreage. Is that correct?
Yes. And that's one of the main things, specifically if we look at our small-scale farmers and the ability to receive financing in this period, because you fork out money and then, you need to plant the trees, keep them healthy, fertilization, make sure there's sufficient water supply, etc. So much that you need to do. And they only start sort of producing nuts in year 4 or 5, but only commercially after year 10. So basically, you can almost say by yielding only, you're really going to see your profits if your quality is good enough. And what we encourage with our smaller farmers is that they make sure they also have a cash crop, if I can call it like that. So, something that's got a quick turnaround time, you can quickly, plant, produce and sell and keep yourself alive, as well as make sufficient money for the cost that you would need to lay out in, for example, for irrigation or fertilization, etc. So, yes, takes quite some time, but thereafter, if you're lucky and everything goes well with the tree, then I think you're in a positive spin, definitely.
Well, that's what I was going to ask and suggest. My expectation would be that if you're a small scale grower, that what you want to do is start out with a portion of your land and start to build the orchard and still have some sort of cash crop so you have something to live off of and meet your obligations until they come into production. Of course, what you're going to want to do then is like every year or every other year, plant more trees and keep growing that. Otherwise, you're going to get those and then they're going to, I don't know how long the trees last. I mean, did it last 10 or 15 or 20 years in nut production and then they stop? Or because with rubber trees, typically it takes about 5 or 6 years or 3 to 5 years to start producing rubber and then they last for 25 years. How is it with macadamia trees?
Chris, I'm not the expert on the area, but I would definitely say that if I look at our trees, we've got trees that's older than 40 years that's still producing, but it's not optimum production, meaning that those trees needs to be revitalized. It's like sad to say, but it's like when we get older, we need a bit of facials and whatever to keep ourselves looking better. The same with our older trees, you need to start looking at how do you revitalize them to have optimum production, and whether you want to invest in that financially or whether you're considering to rather take out and start planting new trees.
So, excuse me, there's a question here from Willem Christian Steenkamp. And I don't really understand the question, so I'm gonna read it out loud and see if it makes sense to you. But I think he may need to rewrite it. I think it's a question of Afrikaans English. So, Chris, can you ask her if they need to save land outside South Africa to start new plantations, lots of water? I don't understand what you're asking, Willem. If you could re-ask, I don't know if that made sense to you, Lizel. Does it make sense to you?
If I interpret the sentence is whether we've got sufficient land and maybe a question about water, I think, that's how I interpret the question. I would say we definitely land. I don't pause at this stage. And then in terms of water, we're thankful that especially in the provinces where our macadamias are planted, that there's not too much. In the one province, a bit, there's a short, but it's not that dramatically. And that's why also from our side, we're currently busy with research studies to look at how much water does a tree really need. Can it be planted on dry land and you make sure the Mother Nature gives the trees water, or if you do irrigate, what is the maximum water that you need to provide the trees so that you don't unnecessarily overwater the trees. That's going to have a negative spin off on nature as well.
Well, that's actually an interesting question. Before we wrap up here shortly, I do want to ask that question. Here in the U.S., we have weeping willows. I don't know if you're familiar with those trees where they have these long strands. They are notorious water consumers. They suck water like crazy. So people have to be clever and not plant a weeping willow in your front yard, because if you live in a place with a house and you put a weeping willow in your front yard, the odds are that its roots will find your water line and crush it and then suck all your water out. So are macadamia trees big consumers of water, or are they kind of a moderate level, or are they good in dry environments? I suspect they're not good in dry environments.
Yeah, Chris, it's a mixture, I would say. There's some macadamia forms that goes very well in terms of dry land, but also in other cases, irrigation is needed, water supply is needed. And like I said, we're currently busy with a study to establish, what is the volume that macadamias need in comparison to other crops, and we're doing this study with the avocado guys. So we're not finished yet with the research, but I will definitely say it's not a high crop in terms of high volumes of water, definitely not.
All right, that's interesting. So before we head out of here, I just want to say that so macadamia nuts worldwide is like a $900 million a year market, which is pretty lucrative. And given that South Africa is the largest producer and exporter of them, that's a good sign. If you get people to lower their tariffs, and I don't know, in some East Asian countries, you might see even more growth in macadamia nut consumption. But one of the things that's we didn't really talk about just very briefly here that's interesting is that by and large, labor requirements are not particularly high when you compare it to other farming sectors because it's heavily automated, and so you don't need a lot of labor. Does that help with profitability? Obviously, and it also maybe it's a hindrance when it comes to people trying to find work for others. But it's not an industry that requires a lot of labor.
If I compare ourselves with Australia, we still use labor, and for them it's extremely costly, and they're more looking at mechanizing, etc. We still do. When it's harvesting seasons, even in the processing plants, we do have seasonal workers that comes in. And compared to other countries, our labor cost is very low. So we do still have, we're not that mechanized in terms of not using labor. We still rely heavily on labor, which is a positive spin-off if you think about our shortage in jobs out there. So definitely.
Absolutely. But does it make you less competitive? I imagine it might not have a major impact because the high value of the nuts, you can still be profitable even if you have a higher labor commitment than, say, Australia or the US.
Yes, it still makes us, it doesn't have an impact because the cost is so low compared to the all other production costs. If you compare it with another farm, let's say in Australia or Kenya or so.
Well, folks, if you're interested in learning more about the South African Macadamia Nut Growers Association, the link is actually below the video. I just double-checked to make sure it was there. I updated it. You can find it below the video. Check it out. And if you go to the webpage, you'll look up the organization's officers, and you'll see a lovely photograph of Lizel right there and all the other officers from the organization. Lizel, I want to thank you for coming on today, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, just based on how difficult it was for us to get this scheduled. We've been trying for a while, and events kept coming up. You did invite me to your live stream of some of the auction or something like that, but I couldn't get in. I don't know if I needed a password or something, so I was kind of disappointed. I really wanted to see that, so maybe next time I'll be able to get in. But before we go, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share anything with us you'd like. I mean, it sounds to me like the macadamia nut industry in South Africa is a promising sector, and that it's an unusual sector, and that a lot of different people, non-traditional people, are involved in it. And it's lucrative, and it could be good for South Africa's GDP growth if it is allowed to continue to grow. So if you'd like to leave us any thoughts or comments about the industry.
I think from our side, we're very optimistic where the industry is going. I think we also, I want to say it's also, if we look at our local economy, it's a job creation opportunity. If we look at the crop, what it means and how much labor is needed and the money value that can be received that goes back into the community. So I think in closing remarks, we're proud of our farmers and what they've achieved over the years and the fact that they continue to grow and we continue to see good prices, which is obviously thankful to South African farmers producing good quality. So Chris, from my side, I just want to say also thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope we have another chat soon.
No, absolutely. I look forward to it. We definitely shall. I'm fascinated by the industry now, and I've been saving and investing my money since I was the age of 18, and so I have a couple of shekels sitting on the side I can invest. So it does get my attention. It's a lucrative industry, and I might pay attention. Willem Christian Steenkamp clarified his question. I think both of us misunderstood it. He was saying, in light of EWC, are they interested to start outside of South Africa where they can have new plantations, labor's cheaper? I think the problem with that, Willem, is that this organization represents all growers in South Africa. And what you're talking about is if there's expropriation of compensation, one would presume or assume that the white commercial producers will be the ones targeted by EWC, and that's just a portion of their members. They also have 600 growers, and 200 of them are largely black growers, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't think that the association is actually looking at that because they're focused on South Africa and not outside the country. Did I get it right, Lizel?
100%. Thank you. You said it perfect.
No worries. Okay, but a fair question. Thanks for asking. That's fine. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot. Lizel, I'm going to ask you to go into the waiting room, and I'm going to close out the stream, or you can just drop off, and I'll give you a call back shortly just to touch base with you. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Bye, Donkey. It was my pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being with us. Folks, that's Lizel Pretorius. And let me get the screen fixed here. That's Lizel Pretorius from the South African Macadamia Nut Growers Association. She's been my special featured guest here today on Thanksgiving Day in the United States. See that, folks? I'm working on Thanksgiving. By the way, Daniel Prinsloo, thank you so much for the super chat. Wow, that was awesome. I'm really appreciative of that. That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's very kind of you for your South African Rand. I really appreciate that. Brilliant. 1,000 Rand super chat, stripper chat, not even asking for it. And thank you for your persistence in remaining a subscriber to the channel. I don't know why YouTube does that. I've had moderators who've been unsubscribed. I've had paying members who've been unsubscribed, and they don't have alias accounts. They don't mess around the channel. They're not fictional. So it can be a little frustrating for YouTube content creators. Some people's channels stagnate. And they stagnate because YouTube is doing these things. Look, if you're a troll or you create multiple accounts, it's certainly reasonable for YouTube to delete your account or to take you away from a subscription. But when people are active on a channel, and Daniel, you've been on the channel frequently, so I don't know why they would do that. My apologies, but I don't control YouTube, and hopefully they'll clean up their act because it's counterproductive. You know, YouTube gets 30% of super chat and revenue. They get 45% of ad revenue. So when they censor people that aren't spewing hatred, that aren't advocating violence, who aren't misbehaving, who aren't denigrating other people, or aren't doing dangerous content, then it's kind of cutting their nose off to spite their face. But I guess they make so much money hand over fist that it really doesn't matter to them. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Really grateful to my guest today, Lizel Pretorius, and so grateful we were able to get together finally and do this conversation. It's a success story and a positive story for South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, which is often difficult to find these days. Finding success stories in South Africa can be like finding a diamond in the rough. That doesn't mean there aren't success stories in South Africa. The press doesn't cover them. Who among you has seen something in the news about the macadamia nut industry? Please tell me. I've seen nothing. I came across this story idea on my own and decided to pursue it, did a video on this back in August, and then pursued someone in the industry to talk about it. So very exciting. Good news. Anyway, thanks a lot, Lizel. Bye, Donkey. I appreciate it. And Daniel for the super chat. For everybody who watched the stream, thank you so much. Jessica says, have to go. Thank you for another insightful interview. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Jessica. And thank you for disclosing your name so I don't get embarrassed by saying peaky, pikey, pucky, pokey, whichever it is. Anyway, thank you so much, folks. That's it. I'll be back on for the Night Owls edition. It'll be a Thanksgiving-themed Night Owls edition here in a little over about 2.5 hours, 9:35 in South Africa and Botswana. And I think maybe it's the same time right now, so 9:35. And it will be at 2:35 Eastern Standard Time here in the U.S. On this Thanksgiving Day 2020. God bless. Thank you very much for your support for the channel, for the super chats, for those who became subscribers during this, and also for the questions in the chat. Very good questions. Thanks a lot, folks. We're going to be out of here in just a second. I'll make sure I get all the cameras off so I don't screw this up. And you'll hear me talking as I do the closing. There we go. That's good. Look at, isn't that beautiful? That's a lovely scene. A lovely scene. But here's a sneak peek of later. That's the one for later. Ooh, tune in for Thanksgiving stream in a little while. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot. We'll catch you here later on Chris Wyatt Africa. God bless, and thank you for your support. Here we go. We're out of here.